Round of applause.
Oh.
Round of applause. Thank you, everyone, for joining us back.
Maybe it's me. Yeah.
Are we good on the audio?
Hang on 1 second. Okay, now try.
I can hear you loud and clear.
I got you now. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Okay,
yeah, thank you.
Well, I was given a round of applause, throwing some flowers.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. That was a powerful experience. One Woman Hamlet. It was a delightful private screening, and thank you, everyone, who joined us. I'll go ahead and, even though we just watched a wonderful play, I'm just going to fall on a sword here and just talk about. There was a little bit of some technical issues that I think we're going to have sorted out, but folks who attended, or maybe if you had trouble attending, you're going to get some emails. We'll clarify some things. We'll elaborate a little bit on that, but just right on the top of it, we're returning live. This is live. This is not pre-recorded. We've just come back from a private screening of One Woman Hamlet, created by Kate Smith and team, which we're going to talk about. And this portion, we're going to be diving into discussing and exploring the creative processes and unpacking some of the powerful things that we got to engage in this project. And I wanted to just hold a quick space for you, Kate, if you wanted to put in some notes real quick about this private screening experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one, thank you for holding space to showcase my film. Thank you. I'm really grateful, and thank you to everybody who watched it or is listening right now. Thank you. Time is so valuable, so I'm really grateful. I think just a couple folks are having trouble with I think internet and Zoom can sometimes be funky. So there will be a expiring Vimeo link that you'll get. So if you're oh, it wasn't optimal or it didn't work for you, you will get a Vimeo link. So that'll be an option. If it was great, that's awesome. And then also in a couple days, Carl has been generous enough to continue hosting me, and the show is going to be available to be watched through January 1st. So if you're feeling kind of funky during the holidays, and you like watching the show, or you know somebody else who might want to watch the show, it will be available to you. So thank you again, Carl, for continuing to make space for this. I really appreciate it.
Well, it means a lot. And as a side note, I know one of my things on my to-do calendar is returning to this film because January 1st is my birthday.
Yeah, you're a New Year's baby. I always forget that. That's very cool.
Absolutely. And I have a very rigid 30-plus year tradition that there's a certain dinner I eat, but it's always movies. Movies on January 1st is just it's sacrosanct to me. And One Woman Hamlet is going to be a viewing party with some trusted, vaxxed friends in a socially distanced space.
Oh,
going to be
fun. That means a lot. Thank you.
So, wow, just wow. Also, I, full disclosure, have had the honor and privilege of experiencing Woman Woman Hamlet live. And I have gotten to engage this film before, but I think one of the most fascinating things for me personally is the way that this piece of masterwork always stays fresh. And not just in the way of I notice something new every time. I do, but it's resonance. And I want to talk about we're going to talk all over this this film. But I think for our audience, both people who might be familiar and were following us from the showing first, I'd like to do a little bit of origin story work with you. Because One Woman Hamlet, you explore a lot of your influences for the mental health intersection, but let's talk about Kate pre One Woman Hamlet, pre 1 Year Chekhov. Where's Kate from? How did Kate even get into wanting to be on a stage or be in creative spaces? Let's start there.
Thanks. Thank you for asking me that. I don't think I've ever been asked, and that'll be really fun and cathartic to talk about. So thank you. I grew up in Ohio, in a small town, and Thank you, Ben, too, in the chat. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody who watched it live. But yeah, so I grew up. It was an ultra conservative environment, like really aggressively conservative, and I was homeschooled, and I didn't have a lot of social skills. I was very awkward, and I stumbled onto community theater, and it was huge for me. So it was an ability to learn about other people and to find empathy, and also to find myself through story. And I got the bug, and there was nothing else I could do. So eventually, I went and studied theater. But as you know, if you've seen the show, was majorly suicidal at that point. I had no idea I was dealing with PTSD, with depression. I didn't know what mental illness was, and came very close to taking my own life. And then somehow muddled my way out of that, and then moved to LA, which was horrible. I was not ready for that at that time, and then abandoned that pretty quickly to come to Chicago. And I did professional Shakespeare for several years. I still do. Hopefully, we'll still do theater again. I'm just now starting to audition again with the pandemic, and I do a lot of film work here. But a couple years in, I became majorly suicidal again, and eventually started doing some real work on myself. And that was when I realized, one, I'd never, not since I was very young and like making shows in my backyard to myself, which I've always done since I was young. Had I made anything for myself, I was making art that like other people were creating, which was awesome. But I wanted to make my own work, and then also I really wanted to find catharsis. I wanted to find catharsis surrounding my mental health and be able to function better. And one day I was just sitting around and I saw myself surrounded by like puppets, and it was Hamlet, and it was my journey with mental health, and I just knew what it was. And I did a lot of puppet intensives. I'd liked puppets before, but it was just kind of like, I know that's what it is. And some of the years prepping for the show was like really learning a lot. I was learning a lot about puppets. I was continuing to take Shakespeare courses and make sure that was really strong. And then I was talking to a lot of mental health professionals and making sure I was creating content that was helpful. I met you. I reached out to you because I thought the work you were doing was really inspiring. I still do. And you were like, hey, this is awesome. Like, this was after I'd had like a script, and you were like, put it up, and then we'll figure out where to put it, and we'll give you resources. And you also give me resources for something I was doing called When You're Chekhov, which is Chekhov, but you can play any of the roles you want. So it's like non-gendered casting, and you can look whatever. Everybody gets to play different parts, and you get to do it in a bar. So super into non-conventional spaces as well. Anyway, so that's like a little bit about how I ended up here. And then Kate now is still figuring it out. Like I said, I know I want to go to fringe festivals. I know I want to keep making things. I'm working on a Mental Health and Creativity Collide with the Network is a podcast I do, and working on an album right now and another script, and yeah, just kind of taking it day to day. It's hard. It's hard being creative in the world.
You know, and that's one of the things that you bring up. Well, so one, the album, obviously, watching One Woman Hamlet, we can see some musical chops there. What is the album? Because I wasn't familiar necessarily with that. If I can just pick in there a little bit.
Yeah, I you're one of the first people I've talked to about it. So my mom's an opera singer. I was a music minor, but singing is very vulnerable for me. So I'm just now sharing it with the world. The album is just kind of like me writing songs about how I'm feeling right now to find catharsis. So I think I'll just like slowly put it out there, and if people dig it, cool, and if they don't dig it, cool. But it's an album of songs on my ukulele. Like one of them's about like how I feel getting older, and it's kind of funny. And then I've got another one about just like finding courage in my life was like a value system. But it's sort of like a traveling minstrel pirate album is kind of how I feel like it's.
The minstrel pirate. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I like that amalgamation. I can dig it.
Thank you. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a good sort of. We can see multifaceted. We can see a lot of these different things. And when you think about One Woman Hamlet, the digital or the stage version, but let's talk about the film, we're seeing a lot of it's so dynamic, okay, because we have the puppets, okay, but you have a lot of cross media coming in here. There's some satire in there, the Mystery Science Theater call outs, the commercial cuts, the news cuts. When you were constructing this, was that part of an organic storytelling piece, like you wanted to do A, B, and C, or was it did you look at these things as like vehicles to push the narrative? Like, was it, you knew like from day one you were going to try and get a commercial cut through in, or was it kind of like you were trying to kind of look for a way to get from point A to point B, and what we have seen were the bridges and creative developments along the way?
Thank you. You have great questions. I some of them were there from day one. Like a lot of it I saw. And then other things was like, it's hard to cut, a 3 to 4 hour play down to 1 hour, and include your own story in that 1 hour. So, some of it was like, I need this for plot. How can I convey it creatively and quickly? And then also, I wouldn't want to watch just like a one tone thing for an hour. Like those aren't my favorite shows. So I really enjoy it when like mediums kind of switch it up. If we have any filmmakers out there, it's like, you have to switch visuals every so much amount of like every little bit of time so that people's attention stays with you. And I think just organically that's what I like watching. But also too, like I get bored with a performer and I really like to do different things on stage, so it keeps it fun for me. But so like the newscaster was something that weirdly was there from day one. I knew I wanted that. Like I just saw that. And the that specifically was definitely there. But the tragedy play with the other actors, where it's like that sort of melodrama scene, that didn't come till later. That was originally like a mini puppet set, where all the mini puppets were doing the scene. And then I ran out of budget and I couldn't make that. And so I had to think of something else. And this is so much better. And I also got to collaborate with more humans. Like shout out to all the actors in that, like Mikhail and Josh and Courtney and Aaron. They're so talented. And it was a really fun day. And Dylan, who helped me shoot it. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, that's necessity, right? Mother of invention.
Yeah.
And that makes me think about, and maybe it's just, I'm thinking musicals and Sondheim, R.I.P., shout out to the king.
Yeah.
But so like the newscaster thing, Sondheim used to talk about when he's making a musical that there might be things he invents, but no matter what he's doing, he'll also have some things he's trying to figure out how to put into a next project. And he called it his suitcase songs and stuff like that. So the newscaster, it sounds like it's like you're part of like the suitcase things. And you've elaborated on some things that were on the fly. Is when you were approaching the cohesion of your story, I almost wonder, how long was the initial draft? Like, was it like 4 or 5 hours loaded to the max and you had to chop and cut, like clear cut, or what was, if you don't mind me asking about the kitchen process, how long was the first draft? Let's start right there.
Yeah, no, it's such a treat to be asked. As an artist, like it's all I want to talk about. So thank you. No, the first draft was at least 4 hours. It was I don't know if I would have been able to it was at least 4 hours. Because I kept a lot more of the Shakespeare, and then also my story was much longer. And when I ended up combing through, I gave it to trusted people, and I was like, please read this and tell me what you think what is interesting to you and what is helpful to you. And then after that, I realized, I was like, well, I was just vomiting at first. I was just like, this is all the stuff in me. And then I was like, what do I actually want it to be? And I think I wanted it to be like, it's okay if you're like me, like you're not alone. And that's what I wish I would have seen. And it was also intentionally written with the things I love, right? Like I love puppets, I love music, I love Shakespeare. So it's like, here's a combination of all the things I love. And if you're like me or you're not like me in all of those ways, right? Like we're not alone. Like this is a normal thing that happens to a lot of people. And once I knew that that's what I wanted to convey, this like we're not alone, then it was easier to edit because I was like, okay, what doesn't serve that? And that was helpful. Like, do I need all these childhood memories? Probably not. Like, do I need, like, I ended up cutting out Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which are two characters in the original Shakespeare that everybody cuts out, and they're so great. And I didn't want to, but I ended up having to.
poor Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, somebody made like a spin-off what if story about them. It wasn't a Kenneth Branagh project, but that's going somewhere else.
Or Ophelia was a giant life-size Barbie I had for my childhood for a while. That was a big thing.
Okay, and so not that anyone asked for me, but as a Shakespeare sort of geek,
yeah,
I gotta tell you, and I'm so glad that you went somewhere with Ophelia. Just sort of, it is ironic because I'm not gonna say it's toxic masculinity or patriarchal systems, but yeah, the whole insight of like she just sort of just and no one, it's never explored further. No one, and Shakespeare's picked apart to death, but Ophelia, no one. It's just fine. Whatever, she's gone.
Yeah, thanks for talking about it. Yeah, because I know she's such a coveted role. Like everybody, like you go to college and everybody's like, you should be so lucky to play Ophelia. And I was like, I really no, like she doesn't really say anything. You don't know what's wrong. And then, like, as I say in the play, and then she's gone. And like it's just, I just feel like we don't support poor Ophelia. She's so invisible. Anyway, so thank you. Yeah. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in the script, actually, because I feel like I've not seen that before. It's probably out there somewhere in some variation, but I was like, that's in me. Like, that's cool.
That's great. And I think it's somewhere in there's going to be as One Woman Hamlet continues to evolve and grow as you share with more and more people, someday there will be the dissertation of like reviving Ophelia, and you gave a new life to her. So one of the things inside of that, because why I ask about the drafting is I'm always reminded of a quote a bunch of people have reappropriated and stolen, but the whole idea of like the creative process being either the architect or the gardener kind of thing. When you shared your work, the initial work with trusted folks, and you're cutting down, you talked about once you started to get this vision of what you were trying to share with, did you have a process where like you kind of needed to were you still in love with the initial work and you needed to fall out of love to make those edits? Or was it kind of seeing what you wanted to connect was like this point of clarity and it was easy to start like really starting to move things away, or did you struggle with like, even though it didn't serve what you were going for, you still were trying to put that round peg in a square peg? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely with some things. Like there were some things I was like, this needs to be in here, and like there's probably some things I didn't even know. I was like, I like it too much. But I think it's sort of like any grieving process is like time heals it. So I spent so much time on this. I think a lot of the time young artists are told they have to make something in 6 months and then that's it. And then it's really hard to cut anything in that amount of time because you're still so in love with all of it. And I'm still in love with the things I cut, but I spent so much time with them, and then it was such a gentle process of letting go. It was like a really good death for them that like it ended up being a really positive thing. It was like, no, it's like, it's time, it's your time. and this is a new thing now. But because it was over 4 years, and there were so many drafts at this point anyway, I'd be willing to edit any of it if it helps serve something I was down for,
so you're definitely out of the in love part. Now it's like maybe it's like a deeper love, you know what I mean, where you're just like, we're cool with what we evolve into, like we don't need to stay the same anymore, we can become what's next for us. Like, I don't know, you know what, if I had to riff on exactly what you're saying, because I mean, for folks who maybe aren't necessarily getting my drift, sometimes they'll say in creative or whatever processes, you got to fall out of love with something you create to like have a certain objectiveness to it. But you've given me a new thought there, and that maybe in loving it even more, you can make the harder decisions. So
Yeah.
that's you. That's, so
Well,
let's
we all need edits, right? Like we're all growing.
amen.
Yeah.
But let's talk. Let's get in. You know, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but let's drill in a little more, especially because the audience has just seen it. So while it's all fresh in our minds, when you're tying in certain parts of your lived experience here, we can appreciate it was hard. But what was the process, the self-care process, like as you're tying in your, you know, when you get to the York scenes and you're tying in your friend in the preface and the aftermath, and you're given this incredibly powerful, and I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on this, on the part in which you're giving the it's really a soliloquy on the lies, the truth, the realities that are lies. You know what I'm talking about? When you're incorporating your lived experience parts into this story, was it? Did you have to be careful? You know, was it could have been retriggering? What was the care process initially? And because 4 years plus, what has been the process of sort of making sure you're staying safe, healthy, balanced as you're going and revisiting these things?
Yeah, yes, it definitely. So I wrote it just taking long walks by myself, and like I would sometimes I would record myself, and like that's how I would get out the initial thing. And then I would write on my own, and so there was a lot of like what I call healthy tears. Like during that part, it was sort of like it was opening up, but it felt good, and I was feeling it in the moment, so then I could let it go the next moment. But I had to be very gentle with myself those days. Like I'd wake up and do yoga, and which helps me, and I would make sure I got some sunshine, and you know, some weeks I could do a lot of that, and other weeks I was like, I need a couple week break, which is another reason why it took me a little longer. During the actual rehearsal process, I found that during the first parts, I had to take care of the people who were in the room with me, because it was a lot for them to hear. Because especially as everybody I worked with were people who loved me as a friend as well, and I think it was a lot for them at times. Like I don't know if anybody listened to the panel earlier, but Charlie James. If you haven't listened to it, it was really great. But Charlie mentioned that you know, sometimes when they do their comedy, that they're actually like the audience is the one that's like, oh man, that sounds horrible. Like that sounds uncomfortable and okay, and like they need to know you're okay. So in the rehearsal process, I had to be like, I'm okay now. Like I start my rehearsal process with breathing and meditation, and then I make sure I do something really fun and cleansing, or I go on a run afterwards and I get it out of my body. Um, but right before we opened, though, I did have a couple meltdowns that I think now, if I were to do it, I wouldn't have, because I was just doing so much. Like I produced it as well, and that's just so much work. And so I was just doing too much before the first couple shows, and then that was a lot, because it was also very vulnerable to do it for the first time in front of anybody, and be responsible for all the emails and the tickets, and making sure everybody's paid and happy and taken care of. And like that was definitely like Kate had a couple panic attacks and I called off rehearsal a couple days. I went on walks and breathed through it. But that's something that I would give myself more space and ask for more help with, given round two, and will continue to ask for more help with as I put it out there in the world again.
Duly noted.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that, because inside of One Woman Hamlet, there's these phenomenal insights that you're sharing that are educational. I think people get to have you've done a great job of distilling certain things when you elaborate on depression and talk about adult and youth, or childhood, or adolescent depression, as it were. That's just such a great, concise way of breaking it down. And for those who, if you are watching right now and maybe didn't have the benefit of watching the production, let's talk about that a little bit more, because I think it's an essential piece of message. I don't think it's a spoiler, but let's. I hadn't necessarily heard the way you presented it. It's consistent and accurate, but let's talk about how did you craft that part and talking about the differences in depression experiences. First, the general term, and then I want to talk more about the way you describe yourself, the a good day, bad day thing.
Yeah, it was hard. It took a lot of drafts, and I presented it to a lot of people who'd never experienced depression in that way to ask if it made sense to them. And then I presented it to a lot of people who also had that experience and was like, hey, does this resonate with you? I know it's different for everybody. But I listened. I also asked a lot of people what depression was like for them, and it was the main, like, running throughout the theme, uh, like there's a couple things I used, like there's the Dementors from Harry Potter, like I'll never be happy again. And in my research, I found J.K. Rowling talking about that, like that was her experience. Um, and there's a book called The Noonday Demon that I really liked talking about depression. It's a hefty book. I had to take breaks because it's very intense emotionally for me, but I got a lot of ideas from that. And then also I was just writing a lot. I was like, what is it like when I woke up in the morning? I was like, oh, this is a rough day. Like, what is consistent for Kate on a rough day? And then what is consistent for Kate on a good day? And I was like, oh yeah, it's that ability to function. It's like I can wake up and I can enjoy things. Like I feel the warm tea in my hands. I can smell the plants and the flowers, and like I'm just so enamored with everything in life. It's a fairy tale and it's magic and it's awesome. And then on a day when I'm depressed, it's like it's just hard to get out of bed. It's hard to put on a jacket. It's like what I love things like hoodies and jackets. So if it's hard for me to do that, like to me, that's like the definition of challenge. For like, or it's a major red flag. Like, oh, Kate's not doing so well. So that was sort of the process for me. Lots of questions. Yeah.
And I hope that's, you know, I've had the privilege of seeing people respond in live, and I've talked with folks who also watched your thing for the first time. And I hope folks in chat, if you were in the live showing, please sound off with some of your impressions of things that stood out, because
Thanks.
it really is essential. And one of the things that you drive home inside of the film is the harshness and difficulty of conversation. That if you don't know the classic, if you don't know what you don't know kind of thing, and that can harm us the most. And you do such an exquisite job of conveying without it being a very large sermon or getting too deep into the academic weeds of things, to explain the difficulty of just being able to communicate your mental health challenges can be so almost crippling if you don't even know that it is a mental health challenge. For you, I'm going to step out of the one woman Hamlet thing for a second here, and because you did talk about it a little bit, but do you think you could share a little bit more about, if it's okay, the earliest process of Kate discovering that there might be something not, that the thing that might be not okay isn't, you know, that it isn't not okay, that Kate's not okay. You know what I'm saying? Like that there
Yeah.
is a problem that could be addressed.
Yeah. For me, I was pretty young. But I think two things. One, one of the sentences I didn't say about depression that I think was really true for me for a long time was like, it's like the truth, except it lies. Like it's a really deep truth in you that like this is who you are, and it's not changeable. Like depression feels like a very deep truth to me. Again, different for everybody, but like so like I'll say that I noticed something at this age, but also I didn't. Like it's a self-awareness that you can see in retrospect, but not in the moment. Like it's and I'll elaborate on that. Like when I was very young, like I had pretty bad insomnia from my PTSD, and I would just stay up until 5 a.m. reading or listening to audiobooks, and then not be able to function the next day and not be able to do schoolwork. Like I was homeschooled and I was responsible for teaching myself most of the time. So it was literally just like Kate in her pajamas trying to figure out like how to educate herself and be a person. Like, you know, like it was like, and I was in an environment that very much valued like, ding, like you're that's how you value people. That's how you love people. So I got very good at conveying the like everything's cool. I love because I loved people. But it became like a fear for people. Like I had to take care of them, and so it became this all that to say is like I knew something. I knew I couldn't function. Like that's what I knew in the moment. But I could never have called it depression or that something was wrong or not like others because also I was isolated. Like I didn't see other kids, so like I didn't know they didn't do that too. I was like, I think this is what being a human is, and I had no idea. And so like I got to college and I realized I was like, no, these people seem to be functioning okay. Like I'm not like my insomnia got so bad once I saw a rabbit. Like I saw a hallucination of a rabbit. It was so bad, which is you know kind of funny in retrospect, but not so good.
No, but thank you for sharing that. That's
Yeah.
it's that measurement is it's kind of funny because you talk about you noticed others around you when you got to college, others around you can appear to be functioning in a certain way, and a lot of stigma can come from people looking at others around them and feeling like they're the isolated one, even
Yeah.
though we can appreciate that people put on game faces, right?
Yes.
So I think it's interesting that it kind of had a different echo shot for you, regardless of what other people's unknown or invisible challenges are. It created a red flag for you, and maybe that's a power a power to the introspection, willingness to be introspective.
Yeah, well, and I think it was helpful in the sense that like I'd never been in an educational environment before. So like I was kind of like I was aware in a different way. Like I think if maybe I had always been immersed, I may have felt differently about it.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. But I do just along those lines though is like I do remember like with that stigma, I know my professors thought I was really like lazy or just like was out partying all night. And that like as some of this I talked, I was like, I am not a partier if you know me. Like I like to enjoy life, but I was like, especially in college, I was doing nothing cool. So it was like, oh, it is again just that stigma that like nobody and I don't blame them because they had no way of knowing, like they had no resources. But it's again that's another reason why I think it'd be really cool to take this into colleges is to be like, hey, like red flags, like
Yeah, and I think that opens up I won't call it a can of worms. I think that opens up a nice discussion on a can of tuna, we'll call it, and that it's a really insidious part of the mental health journey is there's the thing that can be the problem, whether it's genetic based or external based, but all these sort of like oscillating things that come with it. So for you, you have the point X problem, but the insomnia and then the disruption to your quality of life, and maybe that's inattentiveness the next day, falling asleep at the desk, homeschool or not, and any other number of things. As you've been confronting your mental health journey, and there's things that you elaborate inside of One Woman Hamlet, but I want to sort of bring them back up. What were tools that helped you? I mean, you've talked about walks and things like that, but like, what were tools that helped you sort of be aware of those other rippling effects of your mental health challenges? How you see the red flags? Were there containment tools you had to build, or I don't want to put too specific of a question there.
yeah. I'll answer and you tell me if I got it right or if there's a follow up. But I don't know what right is, like when whoever gets anything right, I don't know. But I don't know if that's a thing. I think that friends who were non-judgmental kind of became a containment tool. Like it was this like because when people are judgmental or think you're one thing, whether that's well intended or not, it's really hard to look at yourself clearly because you have to get past their judgment. And if you're in a place that's unstable, it's hard to do that. For me, it was hard. And I met a couple people, which is, I think, honestly, like a huge factor that saved my life that first time in college, who were just very loving and patient. And were like, hey, do you need this? Like, hey, like, do you want us to show you how to cook? Or like, hey, like, I noticed you're not sleeping. Like, can we do anything to support you? I was living in like a group of, like, without a group of kids, and we sort of had like called them mom and dad, but they took us in because it was more affordable than student housing, and those people were just amazing. Like, I remember one time I fell asleep and one of them put a blanket over me, and like there was just that kind of thing of like, oh, I'm loved here, and even in this place of love, something's wrong, so I can't like put it on them. Does that make sense? Like it was like there was nothing to get by anymore. It was a good place. So then like, what do I? Does that make sense? Or
Yeah. And these questions, I don't want to put too much steering on the questions. That's why,
cool.
And that's really interesting. Because I'm wondering, did you, and I don't know if you feel comfortable answering this, so I'm going to just walk carefully. Did you ever find yourself maybe being resistant to discovering certain challenges? Like if someone says, hey, I noticed you're not sleeping well. Was maybe like defensiveness, maybe trying to maintain or uphold the image of everything's fine outside? Did that ever come into play for you?
Yeah, it did. I think specifically in my way, it was there was no other way to do things. I was like, I know that I couldn't do my homework. So, and it took me like 8 hours to do stuff that like would take another kid like an hour, right? Like, so it was like, to me, in that heightened survival mode, I was like, this is the only way to function. I will eat baguettes and Pop-Tarts, and I will stay up until 7 a.m. and then I will get 45 minutes of sleep, and I will go to class, and it doesn't matter how tired I am because I'm doing this, and like this is how you survive. And I think because I was so sleep deprived and so stressed out that like I couldn't, I was very resistant to seeing that something was wrong. I was like, no, this is my life. This is the only way that I can do it, and I'm going to do it. Because I think our brains and bodies are actually the tendency is towards resilience, right? It's like, well, if this is what we're dealing with, we will find a way to function. But it's actually not, like, if we don't have to function that way, it's not resilience, but we can't see it. Or maybe it is, but it's not as positive as it could be for us. That was my experience with it.
And that's a good point. And something I want to double back to, folks, if you're watching right now, or if you engage this content in the days and afterwards, is that saving the college dissertation, and it's not just like a Western colonial thing, but this illusion of resilience is a mechanism for supporting our mental health. It's a bounce back factor. But sometimes we can think what's resilience is actually a sort of ignoring our bodies, ignoring our comfort zones, ignoring our own health signals. And another weird thing that's out there is that we can be reinforced to believe that whether it's as one-dimensional as hustle culture, or something a little more subtle, which we're measuring our self-worth on. I've got to pass this test.
Yeah.
I've got to be like everyone else around us.
Yeah.
And your creative journey and the processes that you've gone on, Kate, do demand that you disengage from measuring yourself in, comparing yourself to others. You really do have to step out into your own branches, into your own ocean, to embark on the creative processes that you went on. You clearly have embraced these things, and you've talked about the mental health side, but just going back to the creative side, which it's all linked, but was it scary to really get creative? You know what I'm saying? Like, was it scary? What was the process like as you started to really embrace the creative sides for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. It's really terrifying. I think I genuinely wanted to throw up sometimes. I like it's but I love it. Like it's that deep sense of caring that like it causes anxiety in me. But I've gotten better with that the more I've done it and the more I've been vulnerable. It does get better. But it is hard when you put it out and I think whenever you put out something that's very deeply vulnerable, there will be people who don't like it because it could be triggering or it's just not their kind of vulnerability. Like it just doesn't, not everything resonates with everybody. That's cool. But somebody is going to say, I don't like what you did or you did it wrong. And that's really hard. It's hard. I have a hard time not being liked. And also too, I think it's hard innately in our culture. I don't think we value artists. So like already, I mean, like that's my experience, right? Like maybe like, but I think we value 1% of artists. Like I think we highly value 1%. And but I think if you're an artist that nobody can watch on TV or like nobody can view as like liked a certain number of times, however many that number is, then I think there's a lot of families or friends who are like, well then like, are you valuable? Like I don't think they'd say that inherently, but
Well,
you
that's
really have, you have to do a lot of self work to be like, this is just what I love and this is who I am. And if you don't like it or you don't value it, that's cool. But it's hard. Like it's taken me a long time to get there.
well, and I'm glad you've been getting there.
Thanks.
And that comes to a reoccurring theme in a lot of what we've explored with our different guests throughout the festival is it's all right if you take your passions and want to make a business of them, want to, find a way to make industry of them, etc. But there's also that other weird thing. Well, it's not weird, of because of the way our society works, that it's only validating what you're doing if it can be readily, immediately commodified, and
Yes.
that can be the killer of creativity. But I mean, riffing on that because it clearly jumps for you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think we are all creative beings. And I think whatever that means, like you can be an engineer and be really creative as an engineer, right? Like I think whoever you are, you're creative. And if you're like, I'm not, then like I'm open to having that conversation. But like I think it's part of being a human. And I just really like I think it's viewed as childish. Like if you have another profession and you view yourself as creative or it's like you judge yourself as you view yourself as creative. I think that's really normal in our culture. Or like you said, if it doesn't pay the bills, then it's not valuable, and that's such a lie. And like one of the reasons that I do it full time is because I like spending that much time on it. It's the amount of time I want to spend, but also like I think the happiest artists I know are people who have full time. It's a variety of types of full time jobs, but they have full time jobs, and then they have the bandwidth and the support and like the mental health like foundation to make beautiful art. Like one of my dear friends, like I interview so many people like this on my podcast, but like one of my dear friends uh, works for a company that deals in insurance and then makes this amazing pottery and is like one of the best creatives I know. Uh, I think like really it's a long-winded way of saying I think you're right. Like I think we tend to value it if you make money, and if you don't, you're not. And I think it's more about sharing it, and it's like even if it's just for one person, and they're like, "Wow, I feel less alone," and "Wow, that made me laugh on a day when I really needed to laugh," or "That made me cry on a day I really needed to cry." And like I feel like it kind of goes back to I think like how um, art was probably like originally used before we had technology, not originally used, but pre-technology of like, well, I'm just telling stories and it's healing for everybody involved, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of the earliest traces of our existence are images cast into caves that serve no other purpose but what we're not sure, but
Well, in history and like how we don't repeat ourselves or how we want to repeat ourselves. Yeah.
and that brings into kind of a bigger picture thing here when we talk about the festival and the idea behind the whole For Us network is mental health and it's suicide prevention, and we call it being proactive suicide prevention. And just to underscore, in case we didn't talk about it too much, is that you've had an ongoing podcast called Mental Health and Creativity Collide. And when we launched our organization and we were going to create engagement on a live stream platform, you're one of the brave pioneers who joined us in taking your work and joining us as an ongoing project here. And why I bring that up is because the festival is celebrating self-expression. What you just said about people might not take it seriously or think it's juvenile, etc. That's part of a bigger issue in that for some of us, when we say we're celebrating self-expression, that's a one-to-one. People can understand, yeah, mental health, I get it. But there's others, people who are institutionally professionals, adults who have been in the mental health universe, maybe because they're in education world, things like that, who don't necessarily see the one-to-one connection. But when we're talking about communicating our mental health, thoughts, feelings, and emotions, yeah, dancing, singing, and painting are as much a part of expression as crying and anger and things like that. But more to the point, when we think about stigma, and broken record I am of mentioning this over and over again, that it's the ways that try to dictate how we express ourselves. When we talk about stigma, and we've inherited from ages and ages and ages, the most visible way is the way we conduct ourselves in society, stigmatizing mental health, hiding it, concealing it, etc. It might be, this isn't a speech about prioritizing the free market and capitalism and monetary things and material things. Fine, but the inverse of that is, in order to chase those things, we've prioritize those things. We've deprioritized what actually turns out to be such essential elements of our being. And saying it's juvenile to work with puppets and to work with music and to want to spend, as a so-called adult, large tracts of your day-to-day time and energies producing and creating, whether it's playwright music, literature, songs, paintings, etc. And yeah, unless somebody gets to commodify it, it's hard for them to validate it. And that's a long-winded way to come back to talking about One Woman Hamlet specifically. Your vision of wanting to bring it to college campuses, to bring it to students, to bring it to as many types of communities where appropriate and possible. This work has the potential to open conversations that can save lives. That's reality. And I'm saying that.
Thanks, man.
You might feel hesitant, but I'm going to go ahead and say that. And that's 25 plus years of working in the mental health universe that I can say that, because one of the coolest things about One Woman Hamlet and the work that you've put into it is that you got to meet people where they are and not where you assume they are. And I walk up to a random person on the street and say, hey, you depressed? Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
That's, the success rate on disclosure and connection might be 1 out of 100. But for someone to be able to sit down and watch your dynamic energy as you float between telling personal story into Shakespearean measure and back into some song and some other things, has a way of navigating and cutting through the stigmas that say we're not supposed to talk about the things that don't make us feel good. And you've really produced a magical piece, and that's great. Art is magic. And you've really gone ahead and put together, and you've done a lot of great things, but I'm just, with One Woman Hamlet, like, you've really put together something simply brilliant. And I said this word about something else connected, but it really is